women's issue. Without further ado, I would like to pass it along to Senya for her presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nuria. I always forget which bios I send in to folks, so that kind of says it all. Thank you for that. So I'm going to try to seamlessly switch to my presentation. Bear with me, y'all. Okay, and oh wow, okay, great. So today, the presentation that I want to give is called The Treatment of Black Bodies, and it's a historical snapshot of Black Americans' relationship with American healthcare. And this is actually an abridged version specifically focused for the topic at hand today, which is Black women and gynecological care. And this larger presentation was I want to say birthed, if you will, for IMSADA Center for Community Transformation. I just wanted to give a shout out to them because I would not have done this copious research and gotten this information together if it weren't for them. But I really want to give BA NIA a great thank you for giving me a chance to get this out further to the community. So I do want to give a trigger warning that just in general, when you are talking about the history of Black people on these shores in this country, anywhere in the Americas or the diaspora, it's not going to be pretty, as you have known, due to the Atlantic slave trade or the Ma'afa, we have gone through some excruciating life experiences over the generations. So there are some things in my presentation that you might see or hear that are disturbing, and I apologize for that. Do what you need to do to take care of yourself. Okay, so today what I want to talk to you all about is the following. So we're going to talk about what medicine was like in the system of slavery, colonial times through effectively 1865. We're going to talk a little bit about scientific racism and pseudoscience. There is a man who was dubbed the father of gynecology. I had to give him some quotes. We're going to talk a little bit about him. And then a movement called the Mothers of Gynecology, which is really an attempt to restore the historical record. We're going to talk a little bit about eugenics and forced sterilization of Black women, informed consent, and then finally Henrietta Lacks. Okay, so
Senya,
as
we
yes.
cannot see your screen.
Oh my. Okay. Thank you for letting me know because I thought you were with me this whole time. Okay, says share. Are we sharing now?
Yes.
Okay.
You're good.
Thanks. Y'all gotta let me know when my slip is showing. Okay, so all right. So yeah, so I gave a trigger warning, y'all. Some stuff will be seen and heard. And then just kind of going down the list of what we're gonna talk about. And the next one, I just want to make sure that I credit my teachers, my sources. I'm an artist. So I'm big on attribution. You want to let folks know where stuff originated. So in my research on this topic, a lot of the information that I got and then studied further came from a wonderful book. And when I say wonderful, I mean greatly written and researched. Medical Apartheid, The Dark History of Medical Experimentation on Black Americans from Colonial Times to the Present. And it's by Harriet A. Washington, who was a medical researcher, and she does fabulous talks all over the country and world about this topic. And that was one of the best reads that I had last year. So I highly encourage you to get it. So before I start, or as I start, I just want to anchor us. Okay, so Dr. King said back in 65, of all the forms of inequity, injustice in health is the most shocking and inhumane. And I just really want us to sit with that because he said that 100 years post the abolition of enslavement. quote unquote. And we're here in 2024 and it's still an issue. Okay, so I just wanted to start with that. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about medicine in the system of slavery. And I want to read you an excerpt from a physician's memoirs, his journal to himself, when he was at an auction block in Washington, D.C. in the 1800s. Two gentlemen have arrived, one of whom I have seen in the saloon. He is a young planter and come to purchase a girl to take care of his children or whatever duties he may think proper to impose upon her. The other person is a doctor whom he has brought with him for the purpose of examining her. They pass along the front of the row in company with the agent or salesman. As they move forward, one is called upon to stand up, then the other, while a passive examination is made. Then finally, he discovers a bright mulatto who appears about 16 years of age and is quite good looking. She is ushered into a private room where she is stripped to a nude condition, and a careful examination is made of all parts of the body by the doctor and is pronounced by him to be sound. The money has been paid and she is transferred to her new owner. So that was a young physician named Frederick Gardner, and he was a Mormon physician at a Washington, D.C. slave market. I want to note that he further went on to say, I have heard that masters beat and scourge them most cruelly, but I have not seen anything of the kind, nor do I believe that it occurs very often, for Southern people as a class are noble-minded, kind-hearted people, as can be found in any country, and moreover, it would be against their own interest to brutally treat their slaves, as no planter desires to have sick Negroes on his hands, according to my judgment. So far as my experience extends, I believe that the Negroes as a class are far more humanely treated and taken care of than are the laboring classes of European countries. So I wanted to read that because I wanted to show how enslavement and the intersection of medicine, how they converge. Like, even on the auction block, people who are buying people want to make sure that they are getting a good investment. So they are taking the women back and they are poking and prodding them in all of their orifices, and they are humiliating them and dehumanizing them for the purpose of making sure that they will be fit for the labor that they've been purchased for. These were his memoirs. This was in a journal that he kept. So this was his personal opinion, but this was also his professional opinion as a medical doctor, and it has since gone in historical records. So I wanted to just kind of show what that scene looked like, and then the thought that he, the speculation he made about, I haven't really seen them be so bad to these Negroes. And I don't think that that's really happening so much. That was actually a pervasive thought among a lot of different groups of people. And that is one of the things that was helped continue to mask the inhumane treatment of enslaved people. That folks just didn't think it was happening because who would risk losing an investment like that? So I wanted to bring those to light. And that, of course, is just patently untrue. And a couple other instances before I move on about enslavement and the medical system. Literally, the doctors for the planters who were the enslavers, their patients were the enslaved, but really their client was the planter, because he's the one who paid the money for the service of them to come to the plantation. And he's the one that it's in his interest that the doctor was, prescribing things, giving diagnosis. This was all in the interest of the planter getting his labor back to work. Sometimes a prescription, one of the ugliest ones I saw was a facetious prescription, like 10 licks of rawhide. That was an actual prescription that was on the rolls, and that means beat them, basically. And there were instances where for the women who were enslaved, when they were being abused, they would the pregnant women, they would dig holes in the ground so that their bellies could protrude through them, so that when they were being beaten on the back, it would not impact the fetus, as though that's possible for a woman being beaten. So these are kind of the ways that medicine intersected with slavery. All right, so this is a picture of just a general auction block, and we kind of talked about the doctor's role there to ensure that what was being purchased was sound. Okay, so let's move a little into scientific racism. So, of course, this is all pseudoscience. It's not real, but this was the prevailing knowledge of the land and of the time, and people made real life decisions for people's lives based on what they thought they knew. So basically, on one hand, there were two camps. There were the monogenicists and there were the polygenicists. And the monogenicists used their science and the Bible, and they had really a theory that all of humanity derived from Adam and Eve. So one source, mono. But somewhere along the line, the African race, they got different characteristics: hair, nose, skin, all these things, and by extension, African Americans or Black people in America. So while we all came from one place, we had diverged somewhere in the tree. Polygenicists were different. They actually believed that Black people, Africans and Black people, came from a different lineage altogether. And this is reflected in like the scientific literature and the way they are treating people, literally thinking that they're a different kind of species, not necessarily human. Negritude is a word that was used in scientific literature and documents. And this is not to be confused. I want to be clear. This is not to be confused with the anti-colonial movement that Africans and Caribbeans had, that was like kind of claiming their Blackness and reclaiming the value. This is something different. Negritude in the scientific literature here meant Blackness and Black skin as akin to leprosy. And it was really the diagnosis for a lot of other issues. So for instance, negritude would be the reason why an enslaved person had drapetomania, which was an actual diagnosis. And of course, drapetomania was the disease that causes Negroes to run away. Negritude might cause someone to have diastasia Ethiopius, which was a mental disorder supposedly peculiar to Black slaves and endemic among them in North America, that manifested in laziness and insensibility to pain when whipped. That last line, pain when whipped, that kind of goes through the line of medical theory when it comes to Black people, Black women throughout, and it's actually still here today. I don't know so much about the laziness. I guess it depends on who you ask, but I just want to highlight that these thoughts about Black bodies, they have origins that have been proven over again are ridiculous, but the thoughts still remain, and the treatment that stems from the thoughts still remains. So that's a big issue. So race classification among human beings, that was a big part of scientific literature, 1700s, 1800s, and that played a large part in how we were treated. So based on where you were in the classification, you would get different diagnoses, different treatments. There were different stereotypes or understandings that you were under. So these are just some, I like visuals. So these are just some visuals that show what the thinking was about where Black people and Black women came from. Yeah, a picture's worth 1,000 words, so kind of speaks for itself. Okay, so Now I'd like to talk a little about James Marion Sims, the father of modern gynecology. And this is a short clip. So let's pray that the tech gods are kind to me. We tried this yesterday. It worked well.
The South Carolina Hall of Fame was founded in Myrtle Beach in 1973 to recognize and honor contemporary and past citizens who have made outstanding contributions to South Carolina's heritage, history, and progress. In the 1800s, women didn't go to the doctor for diseases or catastrophic medical problems that could occur during childbirth. One South Carolinian changed women's medical care forever. Dr. James Marion Sims is known as the father of modern gynecology. James Marion Sims was born in 1813.
He's from Lancaster, South Carolina, Lancaster County. His dad was a sheriff there. And he went to what's now, I guess, MUSC for a semester, it sounds like, and then up to the medical college in Philadelphia. When he finished there, he did come back to Lancaster. And his dad set him up on Main Street with a little office, but he really hadn't been prepared for what he was to do because there really wasn't any internships or residencies, so they only had book learning. Okay. His first two patients died. I suspect that's the reason his dad moved him to Alabama to do an apprenticeship under two doctors there.
In Montgomery, Alabama, Sims built a little hospital in his backyard and began experimenting on 3 enslaved women, each suffering from a debilitating condition called fistula.
A fistula is an abnormal connection between, say, the bladder and the vagina, which is what we're referring to in our discussion, or between the vagina and the rectum. But it's an abnormal connection, so secretions from one pass into the other.
The traditional medical thinking of the day was that this was not curable, that these women were going to suffer, they were going to be ostracized. They often lived together apart from society.
Sims developed new surgical techniques to repair fistulas, often using slaves without anesthesia as subjects for his medical research.
Dr. Sims has a somewhat controversial past because he began his operations on slaves in the 19th century. And in today's world, it seems sort of inconceivable.
You have to put it in the context of when he was practicing. This is the mid-1800s, the 19th century. Slavery was in existence. All of his early work, pioneering work, was done on slaves.
In 1853, Sims moved to New York City, where he founded the first women's hospital. During the American Civil War, Sims moved to Europe, working primarily in London and Paris. He was surgeon to Empress Eugenie of France. When he returned to New York, Sims established a cancer institute and served as president of the American Medical Association. Sims died in 1883.
Dr. J. Marion Sims was really a pioneer in the field of gynecology. He was one of the first to do an internal exam on a woman. He developed instruments to let us visually look inside the vagina and see the pathology that was there. And he developed the prototype of the instruments we use today to examine the vagina.
Dr. James Marion Sims was innovative, he was caring, and he tried to make the lives better for all the patients that he encountered.
Yeah. He was innovative, he was caring, and he tried to make the lives better for all the patients he encountered. So if that statement's true, then the enslaved women that he experimented on must not have been considered patients. When drugs were available to ease pain and suffering, One of the enslaved women, I want to say it's Lucy, but don't quote me right now. I don't have the notes in front of me. He wasn't giving them to her during the surgery, but because he did about 30 surgeries on her, he would give it to her in between, so she would be docile and not complaining while he was getting ready to do the next one. So it wasn't really for her pain or suffering. It was for him to not be so bothered. I love watching that video in particular because, you know, perspective is everything. And on one end, I mean, he's lauded in that. And they're talking about the wonderful strides he made for medical history, but he's also quite a monster, and that is really downplayed. So I like to bring these kind of things to light because I think it's important. The reason that he was able to go to New York and go to Paris and the places he did, and operate on privileged white women and restore their health was because he had tortured countless Black women in the effort to learn something, and he had a blatant disregard for their health or their care. So that is the father of gynecology. And this is a picture done by artist Robert Thom, mid-century, and it's a really sanitized interpretation. You see the two women that are kind of hiding behind the sheet there, and you see Dr. James Marion, he is kind of assessing her, and she's just sitting there waiting to be examined. In reality, she was nude and on all fours, and those women were assisting to hold her down as per the doctor's orders. So this is really a cleaned up version of what those scenes would look like. Because imagine, she had no anesthesia, so she's not just sitting there. Okay, so now I would like to show you a video that is trying to kind of restore the record to a more factual basis, and this is called Mothers of Gynecology. Asia, let me know if it sounds good.
I'm in Montgomery, Alabama, standing with Michelle Browder, looking at her amazing sculpture that honors 3 women whose sacrifice has been lost to history: Anarcha, Betsy, and Lucy.
So Anarcha was 17 at the time of her first experimentation. There was a vesical vaginal fistula.
Marion Sims, a doctor in the early part of the 19th century, decided to try to cure this and used enslaved women's bodies in order to find a cure, but also very much to promote his own career.
In some arenas, he's known as the father of modern gynecology, but then if you're aware of what he did, he's known as Father Butcher.
And Anarcha was the first patient to be brought to Sims who suffered from fistula. The other 10 or so women that he experimented on were all enslaved women who he purchased or rented, a population who had absolutely no choice in the matter. This is before the development of anesthesia. So these women were operated on, sutured, all without anesthesia.
Yeah. People make the argument, oh, well, they didn't have anesthesia then. It was a crime against humanity.
And it was something that white male doctors felt entirely privileged and had a right to do to Black women's bodies, and not something that they felt they had a right to do to white women's bodies.
Right, because there was the notion out there that Black women had a high tolerance for pain, and or that they didn't feel pain at all, or that Black people had thicker skin. This lie that was told. And so these doctors were able to do whatever they wanted to.
The transatlantic slave trade was outlawed in 1808, but that meant it was all the more important for the enslaved women who were here to have more babies.
If you're no longer bringing enslaved Africans over to be enslaved, how do you replenish your stock? You make these women have children.
They had trouble after their pregnancy with something like a fistula. That needed to be repaired so that they continue to have babies and enhance their value to their enslaver. So let's look closely at the 3 figures, each figure is individualized.
We did that because each one of them had their own identity. On the back of Betsy, you could see scarification, you could see the bodies of men. And then on Anarcha, around her legs, there are bodies of people. And then around Lucy, there's bodies around her waist. So that represents the slave ship. And if you notice, their backs are straight. There's a posture, a beauty about each one of them.
Anarcha in the front raises her head, arches her neck, and looks up.
Because if you can imagine being in a horrific situation like this, you got to have some kind of faith that one day it will end. And so she's in a constant state of prayer. And each one of them has the Ingram symbol, and her symbol says Supreme God. Betsy's is strength, and then Lucy is that of friendship, because they formed a friendship. On Lucy, you can notice the designs on her back represent the whippings, the beatings.
I also see chains and other things that remind me of torture.
Well, her hair made of bicycle chains.
They have these porous surfaces that suggest the penetrating tools and gaze of the white men who operated on them. And then there's a fourth part on the pedestal, the same shape as the
hole.
space that's been removed from Anarcha. And so we have a displaced womb.
That womb was done by Deborah Cedric, Black woman artist here in Montgomery. She wanted to show the trauma to the womb.
Well, I noticed inside specula, scissors,
Mhm.
chains.
Which represents the bondage or not being able to be free.
They're cut off at the arms and
Mhm.
legs.
Well, they didn't have the capacity to help their situation. Sure, they could have killed themselves, but they chose to continue to live. And now because of their lives, other lives are now being saved because of the procedures.
Today, these procedures help cure thousands of women. One of the things I notice is just how embellished the figures are. And I recognize tools like wrenches or
Mhm.
scissors, but there's also beautiful decorative forms, flowers and butterflies and things that I associate with femininity.
So everything that you see were discarded items, but they still had value. And I think it speaks to the situation in which they found themselves. They were stripped of humanity, their identity. And so the thought was to give them some identity. So the Bantu knots,
Yes.
the braids, the cornrows.
And Betsy is also inscribed with names of very important women.
You have women like Big Mama Thornton, you have Augusta Savage, Fannie Lou Hamner, Tamika Mallory, and Barbara Ross Lee. You have Eartha Kitt, you have Harriet Jacobs. So each one of these names are either enslaved women or women who have struggled through the civil rights movement or women who are making progress today.
What we've done over the last 100 years or more is make monuments to white men that are very fraught. Leaving these women out, it's tragic.
But monuments must change, and they're changing, and it's taken a creative approach to do it. But I think now the season is ripe and ready to change the narrative using art.
So even if the old monuments, and there is one right nearby to Mr. Sims,
Mhm.
doesn't come down, we still have your monument.
Absolutely. That's what we're hoping that people will get from this, is the history behind it. And that's not what you're going to get from these other statues around the city. You're not going to get the real education as to what happened.
All right, so that's artist Michelle Browder, and I like showing that in this presentation because not only is she correcting the historical record, but art is healing. And I think that Black women who not only learn about the history of what has gone on with their foremothers, but kind of currently are going through some of the same issues, I think is very important to have an outlet. Many outlets for healing. And so I like to show this as a demonstration of one way that an artist is able to kind of reclaim the story and seek personal and like community healing. Oops, let's see. Okay, and this is also another piece that the same artist, Michelle Browder, created. It's a mural, and you see the original artwork. She's mimicking it, but changing the narrative. So instead of Lucy on the table, it is Dr. Marion Sims on the table, and it's his colleagues who are kind of cowering behind the curtain, not the two other enslaved women. And they're kind of looking at him like, yeah, there's a reckoning to be had. So I particularly love this piece. I think that was a great clapback.
Yeah.
And then I just wanted to give you another moment to kind of behold the beauty in case you haven't been able to go down south and see this for yourself. It's quite large, as you see the scale with the two ladies standing there. And as you saw in the video, a lot of intricacy, a lot of time, a lot of thought and love put into this to correct the historical record and promote healing. And then, of course, there's this. We know that 2020 reaped all sorts of magic and mayhem. And so the protests that were happening globally involved a lot of statues and monuments of historically horrible people being taken down, from enslavers to physicians to colonialists, all sorts of folks in a lot of different countries, not just here. But that statue that you saw in New York City in the clip about Dr. Marion Sims has been taken down due to protests. So it is good to know that with activism, you know, and enough people of goodwill working toward a cause that you know, things can be done to promote justice and equity. All right, so now I want to talk a little bit about eugenics. And it was the study or practice of basically how to arrange reproduction within a human population to increase the occurrence of heritable characteristics that were regarded as desirable. It's a set of beliefs and practices that aim to improve the genetic quality of a human population. So famous eugenicists back in the day, so Margaret Sanger, who founded Planned Parenthood, she was famously known to be part of the eugenics movement. So even that history of how that was founded is wrought. But basically in this country, when you're dealing with racism, eugenics means people who are not white. So eugenics manifested in population control from women and their reproductive systems. Eugenics can happen in a lot of different ways. Let's go and talk about the quote unquote Mississippi appendectomy. So that is a phrase that was coined down south because of the voluminous amount of women, Black women mostly, who were told they were getting an appendectomy. And in fact, when they were in the operating room, they were without their knowledge or consent sterilized. You know this one, Fannie Lou Hamer. She was famous for saying, "I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired." She was a Mississippi appendectomy victim at age 19. And that was part of her freedom fighting and her platform for the rest of her life. She was raging against the fact that this could be done and continue to be done to Black women without their consent or knowledge. So now let's take a look at a short clip about forced sterilization.
We cannot hear the sound.
On June 27th, 1973, a lawsuit was filed
You got it. That was good.
Okay, maybe it's lag.
that brought national attention to the issue of racially targeted sterilization abuse. In the late 1960s and into the 70s, civil rights activists noticed a widespread trend among women of color. It was sterilization. In June of 73, the Ralph sisters, 14-year-old Minnie Lee and 12-year-old Mary Alice, who was mentally disabled, were sterilized without their knowledge or consent. These African-American girls had the procedure done at a Montgomery, Alabama family planning clinic that received federal funds. Clinic workers deceived the girl's illiterate mother into believing that she was consenting to the girls getting birth control shots. 2 years earlier, the Ralph sisters had been given birth control injections as part of an experimental trial, again, without their consent. After the federal government ended that trial, the clinic nurses decided that the girls should be sterilized. The girls were targeted for sterilization because they were poor, Black, and living in public housing. After the procedure, the girls revealed to their parents that instead of receiving shots, they had undergone surgery. On June 27th, with the assistance of the Southern Poverty Law Center, the Ralph family sued the clinic and the Economic Opportunity, which provided it with federal funding. The district court found an estimated 100,000 to 150,000 poor people were sterilized annually under federally funded programs. The lawsuit led to the requirement that doctors obtain informed consent before performing sterilization procedures.
Yeah, so those numbers are pretty astounding, and it was even, it was even more than that from anecdotally. And really some of the important things to note is that these were federally funded sterilizations. So this was the government in cahoots with the medical system. And this is just our history. And I think that it's very important that these things are brought to light. So he mentioned informed consent being a requirement that was brought out of that lawsuit, one of the requirements. So informed consent is a principle in medical ethics and medical law that patients must have sufficient information and understanding before making decisions about their medical care. So that is the law. If I'm a patient and I go to a doctor, I am supposed to know what it is you want to do to me. What are my options? What happens to me if I don't get it done? What happens to me if I do get it done? Informed consent has a lot of things involved in it. And this is something that was just deprived of countless women when it came to their gynecological care. And that is the issue that we're dealing with. Let's see. So last clip, want to talk a little bit about Henrietta Lacks. This is another famous case where informed consent was non-existent, and basically all of us are the beneficiaries of that breach and violation of this woman to this day.
A landmark legal settlement today addressing decades of injustice.
More than 7 decades ago, doctors used the cells of Henrietta Lacks to form the basis for modern medical research, but neither she nor her family were ever compensated until today.
This is such a significant occurrence in the course of human history.
70 years after her cells helped to usher in the era of modern medicine, Henrietta Lacks is finally getting justice. Her family announcing a landmark settlement with biotech giant Thermo Fisher, alleging the company has been commercializing and profiting from innovations related to cells taken without her consent back in 1951. It all started at Johns Hopkins Hospital, where Lacks was being treated for cervical cancer. It was there that doctors first noticed the unique properties of her so-called HeLa cells. Simply put, her DNA had special advantages that allowed the cell samples to survive and thrive in laboratories. They were the first human cells to be cloned, and they are now a cornerstone of medical testing used in almost every major breakthrough for decades, including genetic mapping and vaccines for polio and COVID-19.
Her cells were robbed from her body. She was butchered at Johns Hopkins, but her miraculous cells still live today.
Despite the impact she had, her family was never compensated until now. The terms are confidential, but her grandchildren say they are happy with the settlement.
I want to thank my family members for doing such a great job to coming together in solidarity and making this happen. It was a long fight.
The settlement was announced on what would have been the 103rd birthday of Henrietta Lacks.
Okay. And so we come to the end, and I just want to quote Donna Christian Christensen. Health disparities are the civil rights issue of the 21st century. So I just want to, point out that this is something that is ongoing, it's persistent, and people are still trying to fight for equity and rights when it comes to healthcare of Black people and other people of color in this country. And so That's just important to note. And if you wanted to take a screenshot, this is for anyone who's interested in reading any books. These books are on just the treatment of Black bodies in general, men and women, but there is information about women in there as well. And that is my presentation. Thank you so much.
Senya, again, thank you so much for your presentation. I'm sure the audience learned a lot of information that teaches about the butchery and the hardships that Black women have faced, and yet they continue to be resilient, as we saw through the artwork and everything else that you shared. So again, thank you very much.
Of course, my pleasure. Let's stop share now.
Thank you, Nuria. The one thing that comes to my mind is, and still we rise, because we have been resilient for many, many, many decades. In 2018, my colleague, co-founder, and I, Aquila Sadala, we decided that we needed to come back to this work after taking a little hiatus. But when we looked at the infant and maternal morbidity, we felt that it was needed, it was necessary to do our part. And we have suffered for such a long time. In 2020, because of COVID and its devastating effects in the world, but right here in this country, people were surprised that women were dying, babies were dying. And it was just amazing that, studies began to come out and surfacing about the disparities that were occurring in our communities, the health disparities, the racism. But we know and have known all along how we have suffered from people not listening, not giving us adequate care and the respect that we needed. And so we believe that it is our job in the righteousness of this struggle to continue to share information and to have these dialogues so that we can push this envelope forward, as I said earlier, to ensure that people know that there are choices, that things have happened, but that we can make change. And collectively, this is how we do it in these types of settings. So Senya, thank you for being the artist and the historian and the writer that you are. Nuria?
Our next presenter is going to be Asia Ingram. Hailing from the south side of Chicago, Asia has always been an eager scientist. Asia's scientific pursuit began at the University of Chicago Upward Bound summer program, where she was able to experience space camp and learn basic skills to study cosmological physics. Asia graduated from the Culver Academies, a boarding high school in Culver, Indiana, and went on to the University of Rochester, where she majored in biomedical engineering and graduated with a bachelor's of science with a minor in chemical engineering. Professionally, Asia continued to contribute to research as a consulting engineer for approximately 2 years before returning to school to focus on reproductive physiological topics, finally able to pursue a lifelong passion. She achieved her Master's of Science from Northwestern University in 2022. She completed a thesis process exploring a model of polycystic ovarian syndrome and the effects of increased testosterone on ovulation, contributing to 2 publications in the Journal of Biomedicines and the Royal Society of Chemistry. Asia is currently a PhD student at the University of Colorado Medical Campus, working with Dr. Raj Kumar, a pioneer in the field of reproductive endocrinology. So without further ado, Asia, I'll pass it along to you.
Thank you so much. And Senya, that was amazing. I'm going to share my screen. That was amazing. Honestly, I have such a hard time listening to it and reading this work because, as you've heard, I'm a very STEM scientist. So I'm a numbers girl. I'm a scientist. And so I really would like to thank BA NIA for the opportunity to explore this work, because without it, I don't know that I would delve so deeply into it. And it is still very difficult for me to listen to. When I hear anthropologists and public health professionals and artists who dedicate their lives to uncovering this work, I'm just completely astounded and honored to be able to even speak with you all. and to stand next to you all in this work. It is a very tough journey to read this stuff and to even listen to it. The title of this entire series is Resistance, the History of Gynecology and the Impact on Black Women Today. Senya has given you guys a great introduction to the history of gynecology, and I'm going to focus more on the impact of Black women today. I will review a few things that Senya has already discussed, just to kind of emphasize certain points and kind of bring you to where I am in terms of what the impact is today. Okay, so I want to start off with a quote from Malcolm Gladwell from a book called Outliers, The Story of Success. The reason why I want to bring this into you guys' minds is because this book really kind of drives home the point that we're products of our environment. Our special talents and gifts are as broad or as limited as the resources we have access to. This has never stopped Black people in America, though. But this specifically speaks to the success of Dr. Mary Sims, right? The success is a result of what sociologists like to call a cumulative advantage, right? So the beginnings of gynecology with the slave hospital in Alabama allowed American medicine to reach global success. However, most American industries owed their early 19th century success to the unfettered access to enslaved people overall. And so I want that to be at the forefront of your mind. The success that America reaps today is because of enslaved people. And that's important for us to kind of all understand before I start. And just so we know where we are, again, 1619 is typically the year that we see in textbooks denoting the beginning of slavery in Virginia. It wasn't until 1808 that Senya already told us that the Congress outlawed the importation of African-born slaves. This is an important date because while the transatlantic slave trade, the trip from West Africa to America was a perilous trip that a lot of Africans did not survive, it is without a doubt seemingly an unlimited source of slave labor, right? So stopping the importation of African-born slaves really kind of created this new era in slavery where now your slave master is extremely interested in your reproductive health, okay? And so the antebellum period kind of refers to this short period of time where the outlaw of the importation of African slaves, but then before the ending of slavery in 1865. And so this period of time is important because prior to the antebellum period, European doctors were the global leaders in the development of all things medicine, right? America was not on the map. And so this is kind of a big period where gynecology, anthropology, all of these things begin to become burgeoning fields, all based on this, on these race-based sciences that are invalid sciences that Senya already kind of discussed. And then really quickly, I also want to say that enslaved Africans were here as early as the 1400s. 1619 is the date you'll always see, but I just kind of want you guys to always know what the truth is. We were here long before 1619. Okay, and so I kind of want to talk about the antebellum period mindset. Again, this is when a lot of the fallacies about Black women, Black bodies is a term often seen. And this data is from Medical Bondage by Deidre Cooper Owens. Senya actually posted that book as well, so definitely check it out. But one of the antebellum period mindsets were that Black women and white women were the same species, but that Black women were biologically distinct and inferior. So for a long time, up until the antebellum period, it was believed that Black women and white women were the same species. In the antebellum period, that's when we kind of have these new mindsets afloat that deemed women of African descent as almost barely human. And so they believed that Blackness was a pathology, that this was an issue that could be inherited. They believed that race was biological and determined not only your medical outcomes, but also your behavior, character, and culture. Doctors erased gender distinctions regarding the physical strength and health of Black women, which is just like so hard to even really even hear sometimes, especially because it meant that they believed that Black women could bear more pain and have relatively easy labors and deliveries. So this meant that during these practice as experiments, there was no anesthesia during labor and delivery. While you could labor and deliver, your slave master expected you to be back at work like they would a man. There was no recovery period. There was no postpartum care in the way that we understand it today. And so I just kind of want you guys to understand these things. There were also thoughts about women's physiological characteristics, specifically enslaved women, having elongated labia, long hanging breasts, and large buttocks. And then, of course, the hypersexuality of Black women overall. These concepts were kind of founded and made concrete here. And then lastly, this is something that Thomas Jefferson actually wrote about, that Black women preferred the intimate company of apes. So this is the antebellum period mindset. These are the fallacies that were becoming more and more concrete during this time. And here are a few actual descriptions from medical journals that described and highlight the hypersexual nature in which Black women were viewed. So Hottentot Venus, which refers to the South African-born woman who was paraded around the world as a spectacle because of her breast and her butt. Fancy girl, humble Negro servitor, breeder. These are the terms that were used in medical journals. So, I mean, it just kind of speaks to that hypersexual nature in which Black women were viewed. And I want us to understand that the study of gynecology and anthropology began during the antebellum period. So, you know, it is important to understand that race science was also deeply ingrained in these fields as well. And prior to the antebellum period, gynecologic issues were women's issues to be dealt with by women. So during this time, the field became more male-dominated and fostered by the access to enslaved women who could not consent to participation. Additionally, I want you guys to continue to consider the importance of consent, but more importantly, the value of reproductive autonomy, especially in today's climate where we're seeing reproductive freedoms constantly diminished. Okay, and a little bit more background, just to kind of bring us forward. Literally for 400 years, there's documented atrocities against Black women from slavery until now that limit reproductive autonomy. Senya has gone through, did a great job of bringing up really all of these things. I just want to also point out that measures meant to protect white women were not afforded to Black women. Laws against rape did not protect Black women during the Jim Crow era. And Black women experienced atrocities from genitalia mutilation, gang rape, in addition to lynching. Even while the Tuskegee experiment was occurring, eugenic programs were enforced, which enforced state-sanctioned sterilization remained active well into the 1970s. And then additionally, the incarceration of pregnant women in the 1980s who were using drugs further pushed legislation to force Black women who wanted to receive public aid to utilize implanted birth control methods to stop, quote unquote, unfit mothers from procreating. So all of these things create hesitation for Black women to utilize medical institutions and create a lot of distrust amongst the Black community and medical institutions today. I also want to bring up that as recent as 2010, women in California prisons were forcibly sterilized, and calling into the question the validity of consent of imprisoned women. Women who were likely to return to prison were targeted in these practices. And just in 2014, so just about 10 years ago, California Governor Jerry Brown signed into law that it was outlawed for sterilization practices for incarcerated women, just as early as 2014. So now today, California lawmakers are trying to provide reparations for women who were targeted in these sterilizations as late as the 1930s and as recent as 2010. So now there's this kind of push towards kind of understanding that this was not a positive thing for us and that this is something that we need to change in society. I'm not sure that this is a national perspective, but I do want to kind of highlight this just so kind of we know that we're still under attack. This is not over, unfortunately. Not that I want anybody to be afraid or alarmed, but the reality is that Black women specifically, Indigenous women, Latina women, we are all suffering and we need support from each other. So now I just kind of want you guys to take a breath. Again, like Senya said, trigger warning for everything that I'm about to discuss. Even the things that have been discussed, it is very difficult to talk about these things. But I do want you to consider how a history of more than 400 years of systemic violence on Black women, mediated through medical institutions, emboldened by political support, I want you to consider what that does to a society, how that affects Black women today. I want you to consider if these institutions maintain these stigmas and how we might be able to measure something like that. What is the general outlook amongst physicians today? So this right here is actually a very, very famous study. Researchers attempt to measure the impact of things like implicit bias and quantify the prevalence of specific perspectives. This study is the Kelly-Hoffman study published in 2016. You'll often hear people talk about it. It is the famous UVA study of 2016, UVA, University of Virginia. So Kelly-Hoffman published this, and she evaluated the pain assessment and treatment recommendations amongst medical students at the University of Virginia. Medical students were given 15 questions, and the assessment was about Black and white physiological characteristics. Some of the questions were, Black people's nerve endings are less sensitive than white people's nerve endings, true or false? Black people's blood coagulates more quickly, and because of that, Black people have lower rate of hemophilia than whites. Whites are less susceptible to heart disease like hypertension than Blacks. Or Black people's skin has more collagen, i.e. it's thicker than white people's skin. So these just are an idea of some of the questions that were asked during this particular assessment. And then the medical students were given scenarios of patient diagnosis and were asked to assess the pain and provide treatment options. So they correlated the students' beliefs with the assessment of the scenarios of patient diagnosis. What they saw in A, actually, maybe I should use, if I move my cursor, can you guys see that?
We can see the cursor, yes.
Right, okay. So what we're looking at in A is the belief system, right? So what they saw were students that had high beliefs that endorsed false ideas about Black and white patients actually overestimated white patients' pain. While if you also have those false beliefs, you underestimated a Black person's pain. And B is showing you that while you do have those false beliefs, you also have an inaccurate assessment of the treatment options for Black patients while you overtreat white patients. And so essentially, this essentially kind of shows that these biases about what we believe a Black body is capable of actually has an impact on how a doctor assesses your pain and also treatment recommendations as well. They saw that the bias was more prominent amongst younger medical students compared to more advanced medical students, which is promising, but scary nonetheless. And they also did this test amongst lay people without medical training and saw that this mindset was extremely prominent amongst the general population. I also want to show Lisa Stanton's 2007 study that showed that physicians were more likely to underestimate the pain of Black patients compared to non-Black patients. The difference in this particular study was that this was done over 12 medical centers from Tennessee, Washington, D.C., Pittsburgh, Texas, Vermont, Miami, at the University of Florida. So these are institutions in places that have large populations of Black people. What they saw after 455 participants and approximately 177 of these participants were Black, that 47% of the cases that underestimated the pain of the participant were Black patients compared to non-Black patients, which only had an underestimated pain of 39%. And so what this showed was that, again, that early career doctors showed a significant likelihood to underestimate the pain compared to faculty or more experienced doctors. They also broke it up by where you were in terms of your medical schooling. So while it is kind of refreshing to know that maybe a more established doctor has a more general perspective in treating you, it is very scary to think that medical school students could have the same ideas that we kind of saw in the antebellum period mindset that I kind of introduced. In the previous study, in fact, they saw that 44% of the entire population of people studied in the medical school actually believed that Black people had thicker skin than white people. Okay, and then honestly, I could continue to show you guys multiple studies with a similar outcome because since the 2007 study that I just recently showed you, multiple people yearly have continued to do studies where they kind of assess the perspective of medical school students. But I actually wanted to show you guys something a little bit more positive. So this 2022 study by Abid Haik, who's at in New York at Mount Sinai, they found that HBCU affiliated students, with predominantly students of color and residents, did not hold false beliefs about biological differences between Black and white patients. There were no significant differences in treatment options or in assessment of pains, even for white physicians at Howard University. So I just really want y'all to understand that training in diverse institutions with diverse faculty likely has a positive impact on physicians. And I really enjoy this study because I do think that I do always want us to keep in mind that the fight is not over, and we do have options and ways to support and create an environment that supports the health and wealth of Black people. And that's why we're still here. Next, I wanted to show the 2023 study from John Snyder. And this one actually looked at counties that show that higher populations or higher representation levels of primary care physicians that are Black were associated with lower all-cause mortality. So across all pathologies, any pathology, whether it's cancer, if you have a county with a high representation of Black primary care physicians, your outcome for a Black person mortality rates decreased. And in fact, it also reduced disparities amongst Black and white patients, with greater effect in counties with high poverty rates. I just really want y'all to understand that. So where we see increased physicians of color, we also see better outcomes for Black patients. Okay, and then I just want us to take a breath because again, these data is not easy to read, okay? And so when we look at pictures of Black families, I know that can bring us back to reality. But I really want us to see how these attitudes persist about the physical and mental superiority of Black people and how this affects the assessment and treatment of Black patients. However, we did see that this is mitigated and diminished by utilizing not only Black doctors, also being in counties with higher representations of Black primary care physicians. We also saw that across mortality rates for all pathologies, they said, hey, mortality rates for Black people are better when we have Black physicians here. But we definitely need to take a better look at that, right? Because when we group pathologies together, sometimes we can miss certain areas of data. So I kind of wanted to bring up a few areas where Black women are specifically not necessarily have the best outcomes, right? And Mekazin already kind of told you guys that we did a maternal mortality webinar last year. So I definitely wanted to kind of bring up some data here. We see that over the last 100 years that Black women have continued to surpass white women in regards to the maternal mortality rate. That is currently double, 2 times that of white women across the nation. Maternal mortality usually refers to the death of a woman within a year of pregnancy due to pregnancy-related causes or within 42 days of delivery. Slightly more than half of maternal deaths occur the day after pregnancy the day after labor and delivery, and just about a third occurred during delivery. Okay, so that after period, as Mekazin kind of talked about, the postpartum care is really important specifically for Black women. A retrospective study was done in Pennsylvania, Missouri, and California that showed that out of the 5.7 million deliveries they saw an increase in in-hospital maternal mortality for Black women, regardless of the hospital type. So teaching versus non-teaching. And this is important because teaching hospitals typically are associated with universities, which means that they can typically handle more complex cases, pathologies, any kind of comorbidities or diseases that you might have, as well as being while you're pregnant. And so what they saw was that for Black women, maternal mortality was increased compared to white women regardless of the hospital type. And then they also stratified the hospitals based on Black serving versus non-Black serving. And so hospitals with high populations of Black patients were considered Black serving. And what you also see is that also doesn't matter in terms of maternal mortality. The outcomes are still the same and the disparities continue between Black and white patients. However, this particular study did not assess the physician's racial background. So I do want to kind of bring home the point that the previous studies I showed kind of showed that when we have a high representation of diverse physicians, we see better outcomes for Black patients. But however, when we talk about institutions that serve Black patients, but do not have diversity of the staff, we don't see differences or we don't see changes in terms of those disparities, that Black women, particularly in this case, are still endangered. So that's something to kind of sit with and kind of understand. Next, I wanted to also point out that Black women have higher rates of mortality associated with cervical cancer outcomes. And actually most cancer outcomes in general, while the incidence isn't necessarily as high as other races, Black women tend to have more higher rates of mortality associated with cancer. So it's suggested that specifically for cervical cancer, that complications from previous infections like chlamydia, which Black women tend to have 5 times higher incidences of chlamydia than white women, and then also an increase in HIV as well, because Black women are the highest recipient population of HIV, that also increases the risk of cervical cancers. The reason I bring up cervical cancer and maternal mortality is because these are typically associated with processes that we can mitigate, right? There are interventions for most maternal mortality or comorbidities associated with maternal mortality. However, Black women are still high in terms of the mortality rate. And they suggest that 46% of the causes of maternal mortality are things that can actually be treated and fixed. The same is true for cervical cancer. There are vaccines out for cervical cancer. And in fact, if treated or diagnosed early enough, most times cervical cancer can be intervened, and you can live a life 5-10 years later, essentially. And so I also want to say that this particular study showed that Black women were less likely to receive cervical cancer treatment at all, and then also more likely to receive inadequate cervical cancer treatment, contributing to a 47.2% difference in mortality between Black and white patients. And I just want to bring home the point that these are things that can be mitigated. There are interventions for cervical cancer. There are interventions for comorbidities associated with hypertension, gestational diabetes, et cetera, things that we see cause the maternal mortality rate to be higher for Black women. We don't have to die from these things. And while I know this data is not encouraging, I do keep taking breaks from the data because I do want to, one, summarize my thoughts a bit, but also give you guys a moment to kind of sit with the information that I'm giving you. It is hard to hear, and it's painful to know that we're still dealing with some of the same things that our ancestors had to deal with. And so while we do see that Black women have higher maternal mortality rates, higher cervical cancer mortality, we also know that Black women have higher infant mortality rates and carries the highest burden of STI rates in America compared to women of other races as well. But with limitations to accessing care due to poverty, education, compounded with a history of strained relationships between medical institutions, we definitely have a bit of a problem. However, recently, there was a 2022 bill against maternal death signed into law, which implements a option for Medicaid postpartum coverage for up to 12 months. And this is expanding rural care and particularly expanding perinatal workforce, including doulas. This is particularly important because the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services released a report evaluating the benefits of doula support, specifically citing the need for Black and Indigenous populations. Unfortunately, only 26 states have expanded the Medicare coverage that I just spoke of. But of course, with a little bit of work, we can definitely get it to 50. I am definitely hopeful. I'm never going to succumb to the idea that we cannot survive. And then I also want to show that in Illinois, Governor Pritzker not donated, but he invested $20 million into initiating Black maternal health. So the point is to improve maternal outcomes and reducing disparities for Black women through the investment of community-based providers. And if you were at my maternal mortality talk, you know that I am about a community-based provider. I know that most medical institutions do have midwives and doulas that you can access once you start at the institution, but I am a big believer that you need to be a part of a community-based organization that is independent of the hospital treating you. And I will say that over and over again. We can talk about it later. We can talk about it next week. Community-based organizations have historically always saved Black people and protected our communities. And so I just kind of want to emphasize that point. Pritzker also expanded the home visitation program and postpartum care, as well as a child tax credit and a free diaper pilot program, which I am very happy to hear, as I'm in Colorado currently, and Illinois and Colorado are the two blue states in the middle of red. And so we definitely want to keep pushing for the reproductive justice in the states that we exist in. And then lastly, I kind of just want to emphasize some advocacy and support, because I think that this is how we protect ourselves. What they saw was that the effective use of doula, and this is an independent study, they saw that women who received doula care, regardless of the trimester that they had the doula, saw lower odds of cesarean delivery, lower odds of postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety. And then they also showed a graph that showed that that it also decreased maternal mortality and the cost associated with complications of poor advocacy is what I would say, right? So when you have decreased pregnancy complications, that's saving you thousands of dollars of hospital visits, et cetera, et cetera. So overall, the use of doulas has been seen to be positive, specifically for marginalized minority populations, Indigenous women, Black women, and Latina women. Okay, and then I always think it's very important to bring up Lucinda Canty. She is one of my favorite scientists. And the reason why I really love this particular article that she came out with in 2021 is because this is the first time that anybody has.
I'll try. I didn't see anything in there. I pulled everything out.
If you can mute our, thank you. So this is the first time that any scholarly article has actually taken the time to really highlight the anecdotal experiences of women who experience severe maternal morbidity. And what that means, severe maternal morbidity refers to women who have almost lost their lives in labor and delivery, from heart failure, from gestational diabetes, from preeclampsia, et cetera. And so these are just some of the pathologies that we seek that contribute to maternal mortality. And what the recommendations of this article summarized here shows is that knowledge deficits put women at greater risk for harm, and that healthcare providers have control over how information is presented. In this particular article, Lucinda Canty actually shows an account from a woman who is in the hospital bed, just gave birth, husband and baby sitting right here. Doctor comes in and says, "We are going to extend your life." Before he even discusses exactly what was wrong with her or anything else. So imagine somebody comes in and says, "Don't worry, we're going to extend your life." You don't even know anything is wrong with you. And so it really speaks to the importance of the doctor-patient relationships and how critical that is for the experience of the patients. The recommendations of this article spoke to culturally appropriate care with detailed patient education. Basically, they believe that will change maternal outcomes. Post-surgery and postpartum emotional care is necessary for women experiencing severe complications. If you're a nurse, if you're a clinician, ask your patient how they're doing. Ask them what's going on, talk to them, get to know them, you know. And participants pointed to the importance of patient education so that women can be partnered in their care and advocate for themselves. Having the person that you're caring for understand what's going on with them means that you can empower them to explain to you, hey, what are you experiencing? What are you going through? And how can we treat it so that it's specific to your needs? Okay. And so I always think this article is a really, really good place to start if you're kind of trying to understand what is the experience of women dealing with severe maternal morbidity. So again, that refers to women who have almost died while experiencing pregnancy, labor, and delivery. Okay, and I just want to drive this point home. Historically, community-based initiatives by Black organizations mitigate the impact of systemic racism. Examples of free health clinic ran by the Black Panthers, as we can see here. The house ambulance services that we can see here in Philadelphia, the establishment of the National Medical Association. Senya earlier talked about how Dr. Sims essentially was the president of the American Medical Association. Well, in response to that, Black people created their own association, the National Medical Association, and it's still going on today. If you're a physician or clinician, definitely get involved. And then I also want to kind of talk about the establishment of Black physicians from HBCUs. This has continued to provide medical training to Black physicians that allowed us to establish alternatives to segregated medical institutions for the success and safety of our communities. Community-based initiatives, community-based organizations have historically protected us, and they continue to protect us today. Okay. Okay, and I can't talk about the impact on Black women without talking about the current political climate that we're going through right now. Limiting access to abortions, IVF treatments, and even limiting divorce if you're pregnant in the state of Missouri. The news has constantly gotten worse and worse since the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And it kind of feels like a dystopian novel, but this is reality. And they are even trying to create legislation that bans you from visiting other states to receive care. Okay. So maybe you're in a state where you can't receive the care you need. You go over to Colorado, you go over to Illinois. Now they're trying to push legislation to create felonies for these actions. So again, we have continued to experience violence from medical institutions emboldened by political backing, right? And this is continued to be the story today. And then I just kind of wanted to show you guys this because research shows that outlawing third trimester abortions and limiting access to family planning services are associated with increased maternal mortality. The reason why this is important is I just showed you that previous clip, right? We're limiting access to care in multiple states across the nation. Historically, we already know that when we limit care, when we limit access to care, that means that maternal mortality is going to increase. And when maternal mortality increases for everybody, that means that Black women are going to carry the highest burden of mortality in these cases. But don't worry, because Audre Lorde told us that sometimes we pretend like we have new ideas and new solutions, but the reality is there are no new ideas waiting in the wings to save us as women, as human. There are only the old and forgotten. Sorry, I can't even see the rest of the thing. Forgotten, please, why won't I let me click? Sorry, guys. But essentially, new combinations, extrapolations, and recognitions from within ourselves, along with the renewed courage to try them out. The truth is that the same things that have saved us historically are going to continue to save us today, okay? And so I want to also emphasize the fact that Anarcha, Lucy, and Bessie, they were all victims of Dr. Sims' work. But like Senya stated earlier, these were women who were as knowledgeable or more knowledgeable than most doctors in the country at the time because they assisted in these surgeries. They knew how to repair and treat patients just as well, if not better, right, than Dr. Sims. And so after the, I want to say the release, or when Dr. James Sims went across seas and then back to New York, these women were returned to their original slave masters. And while there's not a lot of documentation about what their next steps were in life, I know for a fact that these women continue to protect Black women. And I just want you guys to know that this is the same is true today. We have to protect ourselves. We have to support community-based organizations that teach us how to protect ourselves and protect others, that teach us about our physiology, that teach us about our history, that teach us how to advocate for ourselves. Those are the things that we need to continue to do in order to continue to protect ourselves. Community-based organizations are the history and the future of Black American safety and the future of our lives, really. And so I always want us to remember to teach young Black children to be empathetic to everyone, but especially to people who look like them, because they will continue to protect us as we move forward in society. And I want to thank you all for listening to me today. I hope that you gained something from this talk from Senya and I, and understand the impact that we're dealing with today, that we are still dealing with antebellum mindsets about what it means to be a Black person and to have a Black body. But what we can do is protect ourselves by donating to community-based organizations, donating your time, showing up to these kinds of webinars and learning about your history, learning about how to support each other. And I do think that's the best way for us to move forward. So thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you so much, Asia. You know, I am a storyteller. Asia and I met a couple years ago, and we got into dialogue. And I said, you know what, sis? You and I need to come together and put some presentations together for BA NIA. Because the information that you have to share, your knowledge, and our platform, you know, to be with women in birthing centers, home birth settings, and labor and delivery, as we call ourselves birthing assistants. We really try to refrain from the word doula. Doula is Greek, we're Black, so we use birthing assistants. But she said, yes, let's go do this. And so she really is a researcher, really committed to women's health and studies and endocrinology, and she's just, you know, fantastic. And so she is our blogger. If you go to our website, and I think Nuri is going to put our website in the chat, but if you go to our website, you'll be able to see the articles that she has put in so far. This research that she just put up, because I always believe the data does not lie, will be on our website. We hope to feature many of our panelists and their information on our website. So please go there and learn about our services, but get this information. This is one of 5 presentations that we'll be doing this year. The next one, like I said earlier, is on infant mortality. We'll be doing that on April 11th. It's a Thursday. 12 to 2. We're going to follow up in July with mental health, in September infertility, and in December post-pregnancy. So we will make sure that we get the word out and get the information out. I really want to thank Senya. I have known her for such a long time, such a beautiful spirit, and now in this space, she's able to share her information and her knowledge. This actually ends our panelist part, but we do want to open up for Q&A. And Sabri, are you ready to ask our panelists some questions? Also, we've had some great questions in our chat. If you raise your hand after we go through the process, we will try to get to each and every one of you. We have a good 30 minutes to make that happen. Sabri?
Hello, everyone. Hope you all are doing well. Noria, would you like to start off?
No problem. So our first question for the speakers are, how do we address the impact of medical fallacies about our bodies, Black people's bodies, if any at all?
Well, I think that it definitely starts with education, educating ourselves. Like I wasn't taught a lot of the things that I've learned, I had to go seek out, as many of us do. And then once we seek out the information, we find like-minded groups of people who are also seeking. So when we educate ourselves, I really think that is always going to be the first step. So now that when I go into a gynecologist, I know what questions I need to ask to bridge the gap between what I'm not being told, right? And that can make all the difference sometimes. So as with many things, I would say that a root is education by any means necessary.
I would definitely echo the same sentiments. Education is key. Even like Senya kind of started her presentation about how she delved into this information. Yeah, like honestly, without BA NIA, I probably also would not have delved into this information either. And while I do have some kind of background in terms of what the history of gynecology was as a reproductive scientist, when you are taking your health ethics classes, they talk about the Tuskegee experiment. They do not talk about the history of modern gynecology, okay? They talk, they do not talk about the beginnings of modern American medicine. And so I do think it's important to understand that the basis in which we have this medical community is founded on racial thoughts that limit the ability of physicians to assess and treat all patients. And so education is the key. I do also think representation, so being the scientist, being the anthropologist, being the artist, being the doula, being the person that shows up to the webinar and getting the information, like all of this is revolutionary, truly. And I think that'll protect us and save us in the future.
Hello. Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, Ms. Ella.
Okay. I'm just not getting on with the meeting and everything, so I missed quite a bit. But my doctor referred me to this panel, and I was so happy to be able to share my experience. You know, as a young lady of the age of 29, I was sodomized. The doctor told me that I had tumors on my ovaries and that I would have to get them removed in order for them not to come back. Any bottom line, I was tricked through the whole thing and I wasn't able to have children anymore. I thought I was just getting my ovaries removed, but I had a full hysterectomy at 29 years old. So I was saying back then in the 70s and 80s, they were doing that to Black women, you know, preventing them from having kids. So I'm glad that you have this program and this discussion where, you know, you can educate the Black women about their bodies and knowing the different things and not just taking the word of one position without, you know, going elsewhere. And it's more education now back, you know, out now rather than what it was when I had my hysterectomy.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm so sorry you had that experience.
Okay, so can you identify ways in which we have internalized these things about ourselves, and how do we address these concerns in our community?
I'm chomping at the bit on this one, Asia, but I'm gonna let you go first, sharing the mic.
You know, I think so. I grew up in a household where my mom made me write essays about Black history and Black scientists and Black artists. And the most like an epithet or a curse word in my mom's mind was always, I am something that's not positive, right? I'm not smart. I'm not something, you know? And so I think you kind of have to bring, you know, reconfigure the way that you think about things, because literally we're getting fed concepts of what Blackness is from everywhere. And a lot of it is not positive, from the movies, from the TVs to the shows, et cetera. It's not positive. And in fact, I think the perspective, the way that Black women are typically perceived or created in TV sometimes, or media, can be very negative specifically. And so it really does take education at home too, right? Like you really do got to kind of seek out the resources or seek out these communities where we can encourage, uplift, and empower each other and say, hey girl, you're beautiful. Hey, you're intelligent. Hey, you know what? That thing that you call ghetto is actually ingenious. You know what I'm saying? So it's really about changing the way that we see ourselves, the way that we see the things that we created. That art you created is beautiful. It's an extension of you. You know what I'm saying? So I think it starts there. Yeah, I'll listen.
Yeah, I think internalized racism is the most insidious form of racism, because at that point we're doing it to ourselves and it manifests so many ways in Black people, in Black women. I like to always harken back to the trope of the strong Black woman, which is complimentary, kind of in a backhanded way. Like, it's like, yeah, I'm strong because of all the stuff I've been put through and I'm forced to be that. Yes, I'm resilient, but like when you are living under the yoke of that, you kind of can't let your back, you know, be anything but straight. Like you are living to this ideal of, I can take more abuse. I don't have to ask for help. I can do this myself. And, you know, all the things. And that goes for mental health and it trickles on down in the body. And I think that is definitely a way that we as Black women have internalized it. We're told we're strong Black women. We're told we're supposed to be strong Black women. We're treated like, you know, we're either nothing or strong Black women, and there's kind of just no wiggle room for any in between. So we don't necessarily ask help when we need help, and others can ask for it freely. We don't, you know, we're held to a different standard, and we hold ourselves and each other to a different standard because of some of this messaging that we've been getting all of our lives. Stepping off the soapbox.
Thank you both. So for our next question, Senya, you kind of touched on the idea of advocacy. What would advocating for ourselves look like? What does that mean? What would that mean for our community? And how do we empower people about their own medical journey? I know this is something that you both mentioned in previous answers, so elaboration.
Mm-hmm. I think advocacy happens on the micro and the macro level. For instance, I work with young people. Right now I have a class with young girls. And while we're involved in what we're doing, I just listen to the conversation. And anytime I hear a fallacy about something that a 13-year-old girl thinks is true about her body or boys or sex or anything like that, I'm shutting that down immediately. Like suddenly the content of the class has changed from, in this case, like sewing to like, that's not actually true. Where did you hear that? And it to me, advocacy, it takes there are many parts involved, because don't just shut someone down like that's wrong, here's what it is. That's not advocacy, that's just lecturing. But it's like, tell me more about why you think this, what's going on. Well, here are some ways that you can learn some other things, so that's on a micro level. And then scaling up, again, sessions like these, informing people. Advocacy can look a lot of different ways.
I agree 100%. I think it's all about doing what's in your power. Like Senya said, she has a group where she's directly talking to young kids. You know what I'm saying? So if you have access to kids, if you have access to your family members, take them to the museum, talk about it. How do you feel about this art you created? How do you feel about, whatever? Just talk about it. See what's on the kids' minds, see what's on your auntie's minds, encourage them. I think it's all about, one, making space to listen. I don't think that Black women specifically have had a lot of space to just really express themselves about what they're experiencing and what they're feeling and what it feels like to be a Black woman in a society where the standard of beauty does not include you, right? So then you don't feel beautiful. Maybe you also don't feel intelligent. And maybe you also don't feel like you can be the doctor or the doula or the artist or the whatever. So it's all about really combating those things at a young age and continuing to combat them, because it continues to come back. I can't tell you how much imposter syndrome I have. Even this morning, I was telling myself I wasn't qualified to do this because this is public health work. This is anthropology work, and I'm a STEM scientist. And I had to keep telling myself, like, girl, you see my shirt, Martin, Malcolm, and me, okay? No, but truly, like you gotta continue to encourage yourself, because you're gonna continue to have these thoughts. You gotta surround yourself with people who see you for your talents and abilities. You gotta choose yourself, right? It's not about being a cool thing or whatever. It's about doing what inspires you and going after that and being in an environment that can support that and truly support that. Not the people that just show up, but the people that encourage your mind. The people that remind you that you're beautiful and intelligent and great, and that you can do it. I just basically echo Senya's sentiments, though.
Okay, greetings, Assalamu alaikum. This is Aquila, and I am so right there with you all. And I think the one thing too that we must look at and address is the perceptions that our mothers come to the table with. That to me is just as heavy and daunting a task as it is getting them to not so much take for face value things that said in the doctor's office, whatever, and to be willing to investigate. But for the most part, we, from conditionings, where we want to take it back to slavery or however, but we automatically accept diagnoses. We automatically believe that this profession know more than we do about our own bodies. So, and even if they do, our understanding automatically is that we don't. And so how do we take our mothers, in order to bridge this gap, they've got to have a buy-in. And one thing that I've seen is that, asking for them to trust in themselves or trust in your caregivers takes a back seat when that doctor says, oh, okay, we want to do this to you, or we want to do that. And you, without much consideration, automatically, whether it's ingrained in us to automatically assume that they have our best interest. And we automatically, like lambs being led off to slaughter, we go right in and we allow them. So we have to tap into their perceptions as well as external stuff. How do we work through that? How do we get our mothers to understand that they may not always have your best interest and that you have to trust yourself first, you know?
So true. I mean, I think this is why Aquila and I got into this work, and the focus, a lot of it, not only is advocacy and direct service, because we work directly with our moms, but education. We have got to be a platform that educates our moms so they can empower themselves, they can advocate for themselves, and they know that there's a difference, and they can trust their own spirit.
Yeah.
Because the spirit never lies.
I actually just want to add on to that. I definitely agree. Like, that's why I keep kind of emphasizing this self-esteem, this self-love, this empathy for people who look like you, because that really is the root of everything. If you walk out and you don't feel like you can do it, you don't feel good, then you're right. You're going to walk into the doctor's office and let them tell you whatever, even though you know how you feel. You're going to walk into this school and let them give you a C, even though you deserve an A. And you have to advocate for yourself in every regard, whether it's in school, whether it's in medicine, whether it's with your doctor, whether it's, even with your mom. Sometimes you got to be like, Mom, I need this, you definitely have to advocate for yourself, and learning to do that is the basis of success, I believe.
Great responses. We're moving on to this question. How is the U.S. government supporting community-based solutions?
I'm gonna let you take that, Asia.
I guess I can take that one, yes. So I kind of talked about a few initiatives. The Biden-Harris presidency in 2002, they did have a budget that is specifically from the Department of Human and Health Services that supports doula access for rural and for Black, Indigenous, and Latina women. And currently, I kind of talked about how Illinois also just budgeted $20 million towards the maternal health crisis. So there's a lot of different things going on right now, really only in blue states and in Democratic politicians that are supporting the crisis that we're experiencing with maternal health. America has the highest maternal mortality rate of any developed nation. This is supposed to be a first world country, and we're dying from childbirth at the same rate that we were hundreds of years ago, okay? And so it's really important to know that you have to vote in your interest. Black women typically do that anyway. So I feel like I'm preaching to the choir. I know that we always vote in our interest. We know that Democratic, typically Democratic institutions have supported the work for maternal mortality, doula organizations, et cetera. And so it's really kind of complex, because in a lot of spaces we are seeing a lot of support, like I talked about, but then a lot of spaces like Missouri, Alabama, Florida, Texas, we are not seeing that same support. And then again, I kind of already showed that 26 of the states in America have agreed to take on that extended Medicaid that is associated with postpartum care and doula support, that allows you to use community-based organizations and become reimbursed. So you can go ahead and pay out of pocket and then get your money back. Only 26 states have bought into that. And so I do think there's still a lot of work to do, but there is movement, there is support, there are people who are ready to help. And I think we just got to keep our eyes on what our enemies are doing and what we need to get done so that we can, work efficiently. I don't know if Mekas and you probably also want to chime in as well, because I know that you kind of know a lot about what's going on in terms of policy.
Yeah, I know that right now we really are working with the Illinois Medicaid Work Group and the folks, along with other birth workers. And the focus is to provide birth workers, or specifically doulas, to be able to bill for services for moms and birthing people that are on Medicaid. So this will open up a whole opportunity for our people in our community to have services where before they could not afford them. As you know, Governor Pritzker just announced, putting more money into Illinois to support birth work. And then, I encourage people to seek out, information such as organizations, we're not the only ones, but such as organizations, with BA NIA, where we actually are, and Healthy Start, where we really are, in the trenches and working, with individuals, to ensure that they have healthy births, to advocate for them when they go into the hospitals. So there are resources out there. And just recently, the state of Illinois has it set up so that, if you, whatever your Medicaid plan is, they are now taking, moms to doctor's appointments, dental appointments, eye doctor's appointments. So there's a list of transportation services that are available as well. So, we're making some progress. We're not there. By no means are we there. But I think if we, continue in the struggle, we will get there. And I say this all the time. I think Sister Kadia is online with me. This is a very intimate setting because I see people. I think all of us see people on here that we know. But she is always advocating, and I said this earlier, that we need to pass our information on to our young people, so that they can continue the work, because the work is real and the work is good and the work is important.
Thank you all for sharing. Our next question is, how can community-based organizations providing these solutions take advantage of resources implemented by the U.S. government?
Okay, I'm going to jump on that for a minute, and then Asia, I'm going to pitch it to you. So, we are a community-based organization, BA NIA is, and we struggle really hard to get funding to provide services. And, it's interesting because, quite honestly, government gives funding to the big organizations, right? To the organizations that have millions of dollars and really are not doing the work. And so, for us, the best thing for us to do is to look at like organizations in our community and to collaborate and to work together and to go to those government entities and to present them with what is needed for our community. Nobody can speak for our community like we can. We know what we need to do in our community. We know how to heal our community. All they need to do is give us some money and get out the way. Sorry, but that's really where we're coming from. So, anyone that wants to work with us and work collectively, I think that's one of the solutions and the vehicles that we need to pursue. Asia?
Yes, so I'm gonna say, and I'm gonna just say really how I feel. I think one, I think Mechasin does a great job because she is politically connected in Illinois. She is, the BA NIA organization, not just Mechasin, BA NIA in general, is a reproductive justice organization as well as providing birthing services. And so there is, a push to take on those resources from the government, from the state, to utilize to help women everywhere. But again, as Mechasin stated, sometimes the money, there's always the, there can be money going to places that aren't always as productive for our communities, is how I'll say that. And so one thing that I like to do is continue to donate to organizations that mean the most to me. So Nuria just dropped the donation link in the chat. And so I encourage all of you to donate, whether it's $5, $10, $50, $1 million, because I know we got it. I definitely encourage you to donate to BA NIA. I definitely encourage you to donate to local doula organizations, birthing organizations, to artists. So any kind of organization that is supporting the empowerment and upliftment of our community of birthing people, I definitely think that that's a great way to kind of support where the government fails. Actually, if you go to BA NIA, the title of maternal mortality is where government fails, community prevails. And I really mean that, you know, so wherever government is failing to support BA NIA, I do expect us as a community to continue to support them and to continue to make sure that we have this space and this time and the energy of these people, right? Because we also need to make sure that the people providing services have what they need so that they can continue to provide these services. So always support these organizations, donate to community-based organizations, donate to community-based artists, anthropologists, scientists, et cetera. Donate. That's what I'm gonna say.
Can I jump in quickly?
Yeah, Ebony, I was getting ready to say, I see your hand up.
So first I want to say thank you, everybody. Senya and Asia, you guys did amazing presentations. And thank you, BA NIA, for existing. But I think, you know, with all this talk about like how the government is supporting and what the government can do, I think we also have to remember that our survival has rested on our willingness to be extra legal, right? So I don't want to say illegal, but extra legal, right? So like, just by nature of our Blackness, right? There are so many rules around how we get to exist and how we get to show up for each other. And so we have to be willing to break some rules. We have to be willing to get a little conspiratorial around how we address these issues. So that might mean that while, I want to be careful with what I say. I'll say this, historically, whenever someone was pregnant that didn't want to be pregnant, there was someone there who knew how to address that. Or whenever there was someone who maybe wasn't allowed in the hospital, there was always someone there who was able to address that through, you know, long-term experience. And our communities still have those people. So I think that we have to be willing to think outside of the parameters of what's legal, what we can afford, because money is not the only resource. Yeah, so I think we have to be willing to think outside of, you know, the box and outside of the law.
Absolutely. And also somebody else is in. I was just gonna say, just to add on to that, because I 100% agree, it's also about collaborating too, right? I'm super grateful to be on this talk with Senya, with BA NIA, and I'm grateful to collaborate so that we can bring information to people. The same thing needs to happen also with community-based organizations. We gotta collaborate, we gotta spread the resources. And like Ebony said, we gotta think outside the box. Thank you, Ebony.
Absolutely. I echo that because for us, by us, as you had in your presentation, Asia, it is a you know, it's a practice that works. And even you want to talk about extra legal, like the Black Panther Party for self-defense, they have free clinics and they were helping the community out. So yeah, it gets to a point where it's a by any means necessary kind of situation.
So we have only a few minutes left before we have to let you go. I want to make a couple announcements, and I do have another questions I think that either Sabri or Nuria is going to ask. But I want to mention that beginning in March, I think I said March 17th, we are going to have women's healing circles, birthing people healing circles. We're going to send information out regarding that, but it will be a forum for women to come and share their stories and, you know, come together and just, you know, work through what we need to work through to be stronger, wiser, and faster in the system that we live in. And again, on April the 11th, we are going to have another Eventbrite. The topic is infant mortality. And then I see my sister, Janine. Would you like to come off mute and speak? Thank you.
Oh, girl, you know I did. Oh, thank you so much. I love what is going on. I love BA NIA anyway. Asia, ladies, you did an amazing job. The one thing that I don't think we addressed and we need to put it, I love the fact that when we start off with our parenting, because that's the root, we have to teach our young ladies how powerful they are and how to trust their bodies, how to trust their instincts, how to hear what's going on and say what they need, open them and give our children a voice. So when they do become adults and advocating for themselves in doctors, because we can't give our powers over to doctors and lawyers. We have to understand the truth lives inside of us, and nobody can tell us more about our bodies than ourselves if we tune in to the place where everything resides, which is inside of us. And so I think we need to be talking about that in the very beginning for parenting. And so I just wanted to just point that out. And other than that, I just wanted to say you all did a phenomenal, amazing job. And Ebony, Asia, and all my beautiful people on here, I love y'all.
And we love you too, sis.
And don't forget to donate.
I think in our last question, either Sabri or Nuria, you want to ask the last question?
Okay, I have it here. The last question would be, what advice do you have for mothers, doulas, and or birthing assistants navigating in these spaces?
I would say, as a doula, to stay alert at the changes that are present in policy that trickle down to hospitals or birthing centers, so that you have the most up-to-date and current information for your client. My last client was having hesitations with vaccinations, things like that. And that has changed a lot recently with like the COVID vaccination, the COVID pandemic, who can be in and things like that. You know, that's something that wasn't an issue 10 years ago, 5 years ago. So just stay current in what's going on so that you have the best and most up-to-date information. That's what I would say.
I would agree. I think, again, the sentiments are the same. I think education is so important. I also think establishing, so clinicians in general, anybody offering a service where you are advocating for somebody, it's really important to know the person. And I know that's very basic, but just getting to know them. And that's why I keep emphasizing this like listening space. I do think it's important to empower the voice of the person that you're working with so that you can be an advocate for them by knowing, okay, she said she's in pain. She never talks about pain. That means she must be really in pain. You know what I'm saying? So like understanding your client, understanding the person you're working with, I think is big. I agree. I want to echo the sentiments of Senya that, you know, keeping up with knowledge and understanding what the new practices are, what's required, what the new procedures are, et cetera, et cetera. Like all of that's really important. So staying educated, listening, and then also taking care of yourself. You cannot help nobody if you're not okay. So please, 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 everybody take care of yourself.
So I think we have 1 minute before we end. I really want to thank everyone who came with us today, participated, showed up, showed out, and made this a very meaningful, informational event. So thank you. I want you to enjoy the rest of your Thursday. Have a powerful rest of your day, a productive week, and an easy weekend. Thank you. Peace and blessings, everyone. Asia, Senya, Sabri, and Nuria, can you stay on for a second?
Sure thing.
You
Thank
all
you so
for
much,
joining us.
everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I missed it. How do I get out?
The weekend, remove people.
I think the mutual ground to you might be someone who had it for captions.
Okay. This
Yep.
was so great, you all. I am just, wow. I have like notes and notes.
Yeah, I think it really went well. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Senior, thank you so much. We have to like bring you on again.
Hey, thank you. I'm glad that and this was I had no expectations or idea how big the audience was. There were a lot of boxes there, so good job.
Yeah.
Good job with
I think we had, well, if we didn't count ourselves, we had a total of 38, no, 37.
Nice. Good job.
Yep.
Yeah.
So let me stop recording. So we did, yep, we did. Stop recording, yeah.